Hi Formula One fans, it's Martha and I want to welcome you to episode 19 of Cruising 41. We're going to be covering, debriefing and analyzing what happened during the Austrian Grand Prix this past Sunday. And what that race gave us is George Russell's sixth win in his career. It was a race that gave us drama, controversy, and also gave us a really good competitive racing by two of the greatest. And so we'll talk about the details, but let's start like always we do with qualifying. We had pole position for George Russell, and this was a very controversial pole position. During Q3, so let's start by talking a little bit about Max for a moment, because he almost didn't transfer into Q3. He barely made it. I think the team, for what I heard and read, the team had made a conscious decision not to take him out in Q2 to do his final, kind of like lap rather, and then instead they decided to keep him in the pit. So he was very close to not transferring into Q3. He did transfer, and then when there was I believe less than a minute left in the qualifying, we still had some of the Q3 drivers still going through his laps, specifically George Russell and Kimi Antonelli, and Max Verstappen. And Max Verstappen got into a very big impact, a huge crash. Obviously, he was out of qualifying at that point of time. But this is when the controversy starts, because at that point of time, Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton had finished their laps, and Charles was provisionally on pole position. And then when the crash happened, the likes of Kimi Antonelli, who was on a very good lap, very competitive lap, which likely would have put him on pole, he aborted his lap because of the crash. But George Russell only lifted a little bit and carried on with his lap. And then with that, he got pole, basically. And the controversy there is, by the time George was finishing his lap, there was just a yellow flag on track. So he was able to stop or to lift enough so, to be respectful of the yellow flag, but then was able to carry on with his with his lap. And as where for Kimi, at the time that he went through that crash site, it was a double yellow. So now just a couple of things to take into consideration when it comes to this yellow flag, double yellow flag. Obviously, the marshals on the track, they don't make the decisions regarding yellow flags, or double yellows rather. So the marshal just throws the yellow flag to begin with, just to kind of highlight or flagged that there was an issue on track. It is really race control who can make the call that there is a yellow flag situation on track. Frankly, in my view, it shouldn't even have been a yellow or a double yellow. It should have been a red flag. It was a big impact. And there was, like I said, less than a minute on the clock, so it should have been red flagged. The controversy obviously stems from the fact that while Kimi aborted his lap, a very good lap, like I said, it was kind of very competitive, and it was trending to put him on pole. George Russell only lifted. So the rule for a single waved yellow flag is that drivers must slow down, brake earlier, and be prepared or be ready to change direction in order to avoid hazard. Did George slow down? He did slow down. Considerably or non-considerably, that's a moot point, because as long as he slowed down, it was kind of respecting the letter of the rule. Now, where it becomes controversial is when you took into consideration the entirety of why we have these different flags and what do they mean. They're all, especially the yellow flags and obviously the red, is to signal a hazard on the track, an accident or a big issue whereby drivers need to be aware that there's a safety concern on the track. And I think this is where there's so much noise and so much unhappiness, if you will, about how this unfolded. Because if at the center and at the heart of a yellow flag, a double yellow and a red flag is the safety, not only for the driver who had the issue, but also the remaining drivers, then it should be applied accordingly. And in my opinion, when you have a car that just had a very huge impact, it should have been immediate. The double yellow would have come out, or the red. Actually, when you look at the crash that Max Verstappen had, I think it would have warranted a red. And again, there was only like less than a minute, if I recall correctly, left on the clock. But this didn't happen, so it opened a loophole and a door, and George took advantage of that. Personally, I don't think he should have been allowed to finish that lap and put that time on the board. Again, and I say this thinking about how important and key and central safety is and should be for Formula One and for motorsports in general. There was a lot of chatter, a lot of noise on social media, in the news regarding that controversial pole. But he was, he kept the pole. And then we had the two Ferraris with Charles second and then Lewis third. So race day, there was a lot of speculation about tire strategy. And part of the reason for that is it was very hot in Austria. And it was actually considered by the FIA to be I think they call it a heat hazard, whereby the drivers are allowed, if they so choose, to wear these cooling vests. Some do wear them, some don't, but they are allowed to wear them if they want to. So maintaining the tires and making sure that they will last for as long as they could with the stint, then, and how hot it was, there was a lot of differences of opinion, if you will, as to what tire should be best. But not only that, whether should it be a one stop or a two stop, and whether or not there was going to be not enough degradation to try the one stopper. At the end, it didn't happen, and it was for some there were two stops and some there were three stops. I do not believe that there was anyone who went ahead with just one stop. At the start of the race, Kimi had a little bit of a sketchy start. It wasn't like the start, wasn't like a good start. He has been having issues with his starts, but he started pretty good. The issue was that he was carried so much speed that in order to avoid contact with the other drivers ahead of him, I think in one event it was Charles Leclerc, and in the other one may have been Lewis Hamilton, he ran wide a couple of times just to avoid contact with any of them. So that, of course, it's not ideal for the tires. It's also not ideal for him just closing the gap, and because clearly he was one of the fastest drivers on track. Then very early on, we saw both Cadillacs with Valtteri Bottas and Checo retiring from the race with fire, in their brakes, on their brakes. And this is just not a new issue for them. We had that, I think it was last race and a couple of the races ago. But this is the first time that Cadillac has a double DNF in a race. So far from ideal. We'll talk a little bit more about Cadillac and kind of like drill down a little bit how the weekend went for them. But yeah, that was very early on. Thankfully, both cars were able to make it to the pits, so we didn't have a virtual safety car or a safety car that to be deployed at that time. Lap 11, we saw a very exciting, very racy, amazing competitive hard racing between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. It was awesome. You know, there was like at some point Max ahead and the other Lewis ahead. It was good, it was competitive, it was respectful, and it sort of reminded me very much so of the great racing that they used to give us back in the 2021 season when they were both fighting for championship. So it was great. It was great racing. So it was awesome to see Lewis and Max giving us yet again such a competitive racing, wheel-to-wheel action. It was very exciting. Then on lap 25, we had Carlos Sainz Williams stopping right in front of the pits. And of course, his race was done. He stopped on track, he got out of the car, and that race control deployed the virtual safety car. And Kimi, when Carlos Sainz stopped, Kimi was just in his way to the pits. And then the virtual safety car was deployed, and Kimi was being served on the pit lane. So unfortunately, it was this virtual safety car was a lap too late for Kimi, but hey, you know, sometimes you get good luck and some things go in your favor, and sometimes, you know, they don't align, you know, in a lucky kind of way, if you will. Then by lap 42, so Max, who was at the time in second place, he started cutting the gap to George Russell. And he was cutting it significantly. And it wasn't just like minor margins, he was starting to cut it significantly. And he was, at that point of the race, just 1.1 seconds behind George. So in order to kind of like to avoid further degradation to the tires, at least that's my theory, they called George into the pits to give him his pit stop, put him in new tires, and then being able to put him out there instead of really putting him to fight with Max. Lap 50, Max was into the pits, and then Kimi was the one who started to cut significantly the gap to Max Verstappen. Fernando Alonso was last at that point of time, and then he went into the pits and had a penalty for speeding in the pits. So that even put him, they handed a 5-second penalty to him, so that put him even further away or further behind. Not that it really mattered or was a huge impact, because he was already last. For the last about 10 laps of the race, you could see how Max was starting yet again to cut the gap to George Russell, but also importantly too was Kimi Antonelli was also cutting the gap to Max Verstappen. At the end, it wasn't enough for Max to be able to get very so close or that close to George to be able to fight him for the lead or for the win. And it was similarly, it wasn't the case for Kimi, but what it is outstanding is that the three of them were just short of 2 seconds different by the time they crossed the checker flag. So they were all so close, but we were not catered of a last 2 laps kind of, you know, fight between the three of them. But yeah, it was outstanding to see how the gap was closing and closing and closing. And it felt at some point of time that Kimi was going to be able to get to Max quicker than Max was going to get to George. But then all of a sudden they both started to cut the gap, considerably. But at the end, George won. Like I said, his sixth win in his career. Max was second, and Kimi was third. So that was our podium positions. And then, sadly, Ferrari really didn't have the pace. I mean, they did great in qualifying, but they were not able to maintain that, that pace to be able to compete. And the fact that Max was able to get himself to second, and then also importantly enough, Piastri was able to finish fourth. And the first of the Ferrari was Lewis Hamilton in fifth, and then Charles Leclerc, he tumbled down to eighth. It was just not the Ferrari that we saw with Lewis, last race in Barcelona. They also, it appears though, their strategy calls were not on point. They surprised us in Barcelona with how well they were making strategy calls and to put Lewis into a situation that he could win the race, which he eventually did. But this time around, they weren't. Some of the gambles they took, they didn't pay off. I think when they realized, this is just my perception, when they realized that they were not able to compete by mere pure race or pace rather, they decided to try to gamble on strategy, and it didn't pay off for them. So let's talk Cadillac now. I know there are a lot of very disappointed fans out there, but so if you analyze the situation in a balanced kind of way, yeah, it is just not ideal and actually pretty bad that they had a both DNF. Because the opportunity to grab data and to analyze data when they brought so many upgrades, I think they brought like 10 upgrades to Austria, and only I think they ran maybe less than 5 laps. It really doesn't allow you to gather any significant data, especially on the upgrades, but more importantly, for the race. So that is far from ideal, of course, and that was just not good news. Also, the fact that, it was a double DNF, so not even one car was able to collect any of the data. So the reliability, although wasn't or hasn't been the greatest, for a very new team, it had been good. Not ideal. You want both cars to finish the race, but at least they were finishing with one. I think we gotta recognize too that this is a long-term process. They just started in Formula One, brand new team, just from the ground up, and they are trying things. In my opinion, it was great to see that they brought so many upgrades to Austria. And yeah, well, they were not able, like I said, to test them and to see how they were going to work or not work for them. But the fact that they're trying, the fact that they're testing new things, the fact that they are trying to improve the car time and time again has to be recognized. Yes, I know it is also an issue that we're still having problems with the brakes, because this isn't the first time that the brakes are having, they're on fire. But so that piece, they need to rally together as a team and fix those issues that they know they have had in the past. Let's also remember that Checo had very limited running during the free practice sessions because he was having an electrical issue of sorts, whereby his Cadillac would stop all of a sudden, like the electronics, and then it will kind of like restart the electronics, but then it would just stop again. So that's another thing that they need to get on top of. Yet again, I just want to remind us all that it is a new team. And I like what Juan Pablo Montoya said during the F1 TV broadcast, where he was saying, hey, you know, they're trying new things. It's good to see that they're bringing upgrades, and it's good to see that they're trying. So sometimes it will work, sometimes it won't work. And we also have to take into consideration that the framework of data that Cadillac lacks, because they don't have data from previous seasons or, all the tracks. So that also plays into it as well, right? Again, it's not ideal that they DNF and they didn't get to really test the upgrade. So we'll have to see how Silverstone works for them, and whether or not they are on top of some of the issues that they have been having. For one, I decide to stay loyal to Cadillac. That's why I'm wearing my Cadillac shirt, and just continue to give them my vote of confidence, and continue to root for them, and of course for Checo. So then we go to Silverstone. That is a 5.981 track. It's an iconic race, an iconic track. It's like the heart, if you will, of F1. And it is a sprint race, so there's only going to be one practice session, which, just to tie it up to the conversation we were having about Cadillac, that will be far from ideal, especially coming out of a double DNF for them. But so one practice session on Friday, and then we jump right into sprint quali on Friday. Lando Norris won last year, and he started third on the grid. So, well, we will see what Silverstone will bring us this time around. You know, Lewis loves the track. He's won, I think I read that he's won like 9 times before, so he knows the race very well. He loves it, of course, and we will see what excitement Silverstone brings. It's a track that usually is a pretty good race. It always gives us good competitive racing and excitement, and so I am sure this will be no different this time around. So this is it for the debrief. I really want to hear from you, hear what you think about the controversial poll from George Russell. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on the yellow, double yellow? Should it have been a red flag? And also, I want to hear a little bit more about what you think about Cadillac. How are you assessing the situation? And so leave me comments in here. Let me know, or you can also interact with me on my socials. As always, I put my socials here for you to know where you can reach me, and just let me know. Subscribe, like the video if you like it, and I will see you next week when we debrief Silverstone. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.